Good day, Mr. and Mrs. Front Porch, and welcome to the Tangent Podcast. Today's topic, John Gotti, the Teflon Don, the last of the Mohicans, as his daughter once referred to him as. A man who had such star power, a rock star, if you will, that I myself, in spite of the fact that I knew of all the vicious things that he would do in his business, the business that he had chosen, was a fan. I liked the guy. I thought he was cool.
The murderer.
I know, but he was so flamboyant and well-dressed and charming.
So was Liberace.
I like Liberace, too.
Listen, Jonesy, you mentioned his daughter. So I met his daughter. I was working at Court TV at the time, and she had written a cookbook. So we were going to interview her. Yeah, we were going to interview her for her cookbook. So we were shooting the interview at her home. So we go there, and we're setting up in the living room. And whenever you go to do a TV interview, the people that come in the crew, they're going to rearrange your furniture a little bit. And our crew moves the living room couch to uncover two long rifles underneath. I was like, oh, this is going to be interesting. But she was fantastic. I mean, she was fantastic. And the funniest part of the interview, I don't know if you remember, her children had this very popular show, Growing Up Gotti, one of the original...
Growing Up Gotti.
Yeah, one of the original really big reality shows. And they were still like in their 20s at the time that we're doing this interview, and they're still living at home. And they were upstairs, like roughhousing. And she's like screaming at him to like calm down and keep it down. We're trying to do an interview here. So the Gotti boys upstairs are like wrestling or whatever. And I'm trying to interview her about her cookbook. And it was an interesting day.
The man went away for 5 murders, Jonesy. Now I know. Met. Now, did you ever meet Gotti?
No, but when I was dating this girl, we would walk home through Manhattan, and I told her of my curiosity, my fondness of John Gotti. She said, "You want to see John Gotti?" And we walked up Mott Street, Little Italy, New York City, by the Ravenite Social Club, which is where he would hang in Manhattan. And sure enough, John Gotti gets out of a car, and because he would be there every night at the same time, and she knew this by walking by, and walks towards us. He was very gentlemanly towards her, gave her a good evening, ma'am, kind of thing. And he just, just the way he carried himself. And I realized that he's a murderer, realized he's done bad things. And you can make excuses and say, well, they only killed their own. But that's not true. He had a guy murdered who disappeared forever, who had an accident and ran over John Gotti's child. So he didn't just kill his own, but for some reason, I've always liked the bad guy, and I would see him on the news saying that he was going to beat the charges, and I would see Bruce Cutler, his lawyer, like take the indictment, and he did this great opening to the jury, and his lawyer Bruce Cutler took the indictment, the big giant file, and dropped it in the garbage. I mean, there was just so much flamboyance.
Well, that's a classic defense attorney trick. There was another one. I think I can do it here, where he used to do it. There was a defense attorney in Bergen County who used to take the indictment and rip it in half and say, "This is not evidence. This is nothing. We'll put it in the garbage." One of our prosecutors would go and have it and wait until his closing argument when the defense could no longer respond, and he would tape it back together as he explained how he put the pieces of the evidence together. It was brilliant. It was the brilliant comeback.
Great showmanship.
Bruce Cutler, he was good. He knew how to speak to his crowd, which was like his fellow New Yorkers, especially if he was in federal court in Brooklyn. But Gotti, they won those trials through jury tampering for the most part.
Exactly.
Isn't that how they won?
Absolutely through jury tampering. Absolutely through jury tampering. There was no way around it. You take a look at, that's how these mob guys win those trials, is through tampering. Okay?
Or do you mind being on that jury though in the heyday of the mafia? The mafia, like You would be scared to say guilty.
Yeah, you'd be terrified.
And, I've never met John Gotti, okay, but a very, very dear friend of mine, Mike Caracciolo, the kid from Brooklyn, was
Mike Caracciolo. I know Mikey. Yeah,
Mike was a comedian. He and I actually tried out for Last Comic Standing together, thanks to the late Greg Giraldo. And Mike Caracciolo was John Gotti's ticket broker. And he had nothing but incredible comments about John Gotti. How wonderful. And he always referred to him as Mr. Gotti. Never said John Gotti, never say, he always said Mr. Gotti. And he goes, Mr. Gotti would call me up and he'd say, you got the Ali fight. I need to be in the front row. I got to have sweat coming on my suit. That's how close I got to be. And
that's a lot of pressure to get those tickets.
And believe me, Mike got him the tickets, and he said, I'd say, Mr. Gotti, I apologize, but they were expensive, and this, that, the other thing. Mr. Gotti goes, I got no problem paying for quality, and that's what he would do.
Oh, Gotti would pay for the tickets, though. Gotti would pay for the tickets.
Gotti would pay for the tickets. Always paid for the tickets at the Raven Night Social Club. They would always meet there, and
would you be a little scared giving them the bill?
I asked him about that, and he said no. He goes, the guy, he was a businessman. That's how he did things, and he would always, he'd need 2 tickets, 4 tickets, 6 tickets, 8 tickets. Sinatra came in town. He'd need this number of tickets, all this other kind of stuff. He goes, and I always got it for him. And he goes, and he always paid it. And he has, as Mike would say, plus the VIG. So he always paid the VIG too.
Well, in getting those tickets for the Don, whoever he was getting them from, would he say these are for the Don?
No, never would do that. Never.
Sure that he could get the tickets. Like maybe somebody doesn't want to sell.
He always was able to get the ticket. This guy I will tell you, unfortunately he's deceased now, but anytime I wanted to go to a show, I went to see Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. I was sitting next to Neil Young. That's how this guy's tickets were. This guy was incredible. And he could work Madison Square Garden and everything else. The cops would leave him alone. Nobody would touch him. And he would have tickets for all the Broadway shows, always the best quality tickets. And he made a fortune doing it, and he lost a fortune doing it because he would take a risk on, putting $25,000 down on a Broadway show that he thought was going to be a hit. And then it turns out to be a bust. And then he's stuck with the tickets. But he made his fortune on the producers, and he made his fortune on
Old Calcutta.
Not Old Calcutta. No, whatchamacallit? What was the
Guys and Dow.
Lion King.
Yeah.
Lion King was another one he made a fortune on. But like in the town I grew up in, all right. We had mafia underbosses that lived in my town. You had Arnold Squitieri, okay, who was an underboss for the Gambino family, and then was promoted by John Gotti.
When I went through, my parents kept a lot of the stuff, including the cards for my christening. And when I went through the cards on who came by to, congratulate, I found a card signed by Richie Boyardo.
Okay.
Richie the Boot.
To the boot, yeah.
What was Richie's thing?
What was his what?
I'm not familiar with him. Was he?
I think he's the one that Tony Soprano was based upon.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Do you remember Vinny the Chin?
Well, John Gotti, of course.
Yeah.
His cousin was the municipal court judge in Cliffside Park.
Oh, that's convenient. John Gotti
and his brother was a priest who had kids.
Bobby Frank Jr.
in East Harlem. But Nick Gigante was municipal court judge in Cliffside Park.
But Vincent the Chin took a different approach. Rather than walk around in the best tailored suits,
he was the odd
Chin would be disheveled. He'd be wearing a dirty bathrobe, and he would walk around Greenwich Village in New York City, going to buy a newspaper, looking like he was out of his mind. And they say the reason he was doing that is that was going to be his defense when they came down on him.
Right. Well, that's what
Junior Soprano did in The Sopranos when he got indicted.
Yes,
exactly. They all show up with the oxygen tanks, the whole 9 yards. But the But then Vinny loves that when they come in the wheelchairs. He always likes to point that out. But the like, I met Sammy the Bull Gravano at the Bergen County Jail.
There's a rat.
Because the rat was up on a charge on another guy who I met by the name of Richard Kuklinski, the Iceman.
Oh,
And Kuklinski's daughter was friendly with my sister. She went to Holy Angels and was part of the color guard.
Are you the one who? No. I worked with someone that went on a date with her, with the Iceman's daughter.
Yeah, she went to Holy Angels High School. Very nice girl. And we would see him at the football games. He came to the Moscow football games.
So if you were going to marry the daughter of the Iceman, would you have to go to the Iceman and ask for her hand in marriage?
He ended up going away, and then he died in prison. But he fingered Sammy the Bull Gravano as a favor to John Gotti, because what happened was Gravano had a deal where he confessed to 14 murders,
right,
and ended up getting a 5-year sentence.
Yeah,
but one of those things on those deals is that you have to tell everything, and if you leave something out, then you're screwed. They said Gravano was left out the fact that he killed a policeman up in Saddle River, New Jersey, who was a New York cop. That was a corrupt cop in New York, and and had to be corrupt because you can't live in New Jersey and be a New York police officer. But whatever. So he ended up hiring the Iceman to kill this guy in Saddle River, and the Iceman said that and confessed to it. And that's how I met them, because they were both in the Bergen County jail, and they were being brought up on indictment charges and everything else. So I got to see Kuklinski up close because I had a prisoner in the other cell. And then I got to see Gravano because I had a prisoner in the other cell. So they were both brought up into Bergen County. But Kuklinski got to the point where he was just confessing to everything. Okay?
And he was doing HBO specials.
He was doing HBO specials. He was talking about, at Frank Luciana, the dapper Don of the.
I think in the end he's probably making stuff up, right?
I'm sorry.
He's probably making stuff up at the end.
Yeah, I really do, because if it was true, he was even involved with getting rid of some of the, like, almost Kennedy, for God's sakes. I mean, like,
he was involved. Did he say he's involved with Hoffa?
Well, he says he was. He said he was involved in the Hoffa thing and the whole 9 yards. But I mean, it's not uncommon, though, for the mafia to use other people, for murders. I mean, they set up Murder Incorporated, which was Albert Anastasia, as a separate entity, and then they would get contracts to write in New York. They would use the Westies, which were these groups of Irish mobsters, and that were ruthless and horrendous killers. And then they would be the ones to do the killing. And Kuklinski was never a member of the mafia because he's not Italian. And then he would be hired.
Right. Do you think the mob really exists, the Italian mafia, or is it no?
Well, I always thought it existed. And I remember as a kid growing up that, like, in Englewood Cliffs, we'd have these kids to come in and say that they're.
No, but I'm saying today, 2020.
Yeah, it still exists.
Yes, absolutely. Al took me to lunch or dinner at a place called the Parkside in Queens. And he pointed out in the neighborhood, there's a social club next to it. And Al, I was like, avert your eyes kind of thing as we walked by. And it was all these characters that you would see right in the movies, like the 98-year-old man with a cane, like sitting out front. And it was the
security guard sitting in a folding chair in the sweatsuit. With a bullet on his ankle, like you're going, oh, what the hell's going on there?
It was fantastic. It was one of my favorite parts of our adventure together, Al, to watch those guys.
And that that Parkside's a phenomenal restaurant too, by the way. So, and then you go across the street and you get the lemon ice king of Corona. So you get
the diner where Bob Grant would go all the time.
No, Bob Grant would go to a diner in New Jersey.
Yeah, that was that diner in like Woodbridge, New Jersey.
Oh, okay.
But Parkside's a phenomenal restaurant. Try to get in. It's not an easy place to get a reservation for. But like the mafia thing, when I was a kid, as I said, we had kids in school that would say, their father was in the mafia and stuff like that. And I would go home and I tell my dad, my father would look at me and he goes, listen, if they're telling you their father's in the mafia, he's not in the mafia. I'm like, well, what does that mean? He goes, the ones you got to worry about are the ones that with the Italian last names that are not telling you that they're in the mafia. And I went to school with these kids. Alphonse Siska was a mob guy. Okay, I went to school with his kids. And then I was the Little League coach for his grandkids. And he would come up to the field and he would sit there with Squitieri, okay? They'd watch the games. They'd buy food for everybody. And always, take care of the uniforms, the whole 9 yards, and go forward. And it was always like...
Did they tip the coach? Did they tip the coach? Nice job there, coach.
We got...
Did you handshake?
We got taken care of in case, that, and it was one of those things like...
Don't worry about the balls and strikes today.
They would go to the umpire and they go, keep it fair, and put $100 into his hand.
I love that episode of The Sopranos when they were involved with the girls' soccer and Meadow was playing and her friends, and the soccer coach was accused of sexually molesting one of Meadow's friends.
That's right.
It's like every viewer is please, Tony, whack him, right? We're all cheering for, but Tony restrains himself and the guy just kind of leaves town. But interesting. Hey, I'm going to go out on a limb here. You ready?
Yeah.
I thought John Travolta was great as John Gotti.
But you go out on a limb and go out the window with that. It was horrible. Right. It was horrible. Horrible.
Robert Blake was once offered a role as John Gotti, and he refused the role because he was afraid of repercussion.
Little Mickey Gubitosi?
Yes.
Well, what was interesting, if you watch the program, I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it was about the making of The Godfather. It was a series. It's on one of the streaming services, and it's about the producer who made The Godfather. And he's not the writers, but the man who was producing it for the studio. And the deals that were cut with the actual mob to be able to make the movie. Like, there were actual sit downs and meetings with the heads of these families, because at the time, the mob came out against The Godfather. It was this huge novel by Mario Puzo, and then the mob created this anti-defamation league for the Italians. And the head of the mob was the guy making speeches saying this was disparaging Italian Americans, and they were going to boycott it. And they controlled the unions, and the movie never would have been made, but they had to cut the deal with the mob, and it was fascinating to watch in this series. It was not as good as
it's interesting you should bring this up, and because I myself had to get permission. In the 7th grade, I wrote my first play, which was it was The Godfather meets Rocky on the Planet of the Apes. It was a play I wrote, I directed, starred, and I got permission from both Siska and Squitieri to be able to play the role of Don Corleone, who gets into a rocket ship with Rocky and goes to and lands in the Planet of the Apes, unbeknownst to them. And then the end of the movie was a fight scene, between me as the Godfather against Mike Bello as Sly Stallone or Rocky, and we fight and we get into the corner, and then he punches out one of the guys, General Aldo, and I punch out Dr. Zayas, and then we get out of the Planet of the Apes. And I got permission for that from the players that were mob guys. I didn't want to have any problems, Ben. I didn't want no problems. I wanted to be able to start my bike up without it exploding every morning.
Whee!
And the thing, Jonesy, This is a true story.
I know.
100%
I know.
sure that he wrote this thing.
I did write it.
Thing about Albert.
It was up for. It was. I then redid it in the 8th grade. Okay, we upgraded it to the 8th grade, and then I took it on the road and did it at summer camp. So I mean, there were 3 things. There was they call it the Crappy Award, which is the high school plays award, and it was a very moving moment. It was the first play I ever wrote. So
interesting. But
the amazing thing about Albert is, Al, you'll tell these stories that I'll be like, no way. Like you talked about how you were at Woodstock, and I did the math quickly in my head, as did Vinny, and we're like, no, we got him. And you were at Woodstock at the age of like 4 or something like that.
No, at 7. Age of 7. And then the Godfather versus Rocky on the Planet of the Apes. He was a genius. But I got
John Gotti, though. It was sort of a sad ending, right? He just sort of faded away, dying of cancer behind bars.
Yeah. Well, it was, the mob always, from what I understand, they didn't like guys like him who would, everybody knows your name. You're not supposed to know them. They're supposed to be in the shadows, kind of thing. And he wanted the limelight, and he got the limelight.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the situation that you talked about, Ben, with regards to the Italians were not happy with the movie, The Godfather. They ended up like Joe Colombo, who was a mob guy. Started this.
He was the key. He was the key.
Right. He was the guy who started up this like Italian American love organization that was designed to say there's no such thing as the mafia and that it doesn't exist and all that kind of stuff. And then, he ends up getting shot himself, but he survived. And then I think he retired. He's one of the rare dons that actually retired from The Godfather.
Well, John Gotti Jr. John Gotti Jr. was allowed to retire.
Right. He stepped down, after doing prison and the whole 9 yards with that.
Yeah, this is back in the day at a nightclub down in South Florida. I think it was Joseph's Nightclub. And the buzz all around the nightclub was that Junior was there. John Gotti Jr. was there. And they sort of roped off a section of the nightclub just for him and his posse.
See, that gets back to my original, when we opened, I talked about how I was a fan of his, even though he's a horrible murderer. In just that kind of buzz that his son could create, people get excited because, here's this man who... he does things that you and I would never do, but he's a star,
Didn't Curtis Sliwa say that the Gottis were the ones that tried to assassinate him? And
yes,
he survived.
Yeah,
and he was shot while getting he got into a taxi. They knew that he would taxi to the radio station to do his morning show every day from my old neighborhood, the East Village, and the cab driver started shooting. And he jumped out the window, and he was shot numerous times. I believe he was also shot in the nether region and survived, and eventually came out and said it was because he was saying bad things on the air about the Gottis.
Yeah. What a crazy life and career he's had, by the way. But
info.
Yeah. So
yeah, it really was.
Look at Emicucci. It's about that time. So what have we learned? Well, John Gotti died in prison at the age of 61. So there you go. Say goodnight, Vinny.
Good night, Vinny.